The night Logan Barrett was fired, everyone at Raven Ridge assumed he was just a broke single dad too stubborn to know when he was beaten. Connor Vale laughed in front of his daughter, told him a fired technician couldn't touch a single door ever again. But at exactly 11:47 that night, when the underground facility locked every employee inside, the steel doors began opening one by one, as if taking orders from a man who had already walked out. On the central monitor, a single line appeared. Logan still holds the key. Stay until the very end, because the last door that opened was the one that brought an entire company to its knees. The back gate of Raven Ridge Applied Systems was not built for goodbyes. It was built for controlled exits, badge scans, camera sweeps, the kind of departure that left a data trail. On the night Logan Barrett walked through it for what everyone believed was the last time, the desert wind pushed cold against his collar and flung fine grit across the chain-link fencing. The floodlights overhead made the pavement look surgical, white and unforgiving. Logan carried a cardboard box. Inside was a coffee mug from his third year on the job, a handful of folded schematics he had drawn by hand during late shifts, and a photograph of his daughter taken on the morning of her first day of school. She had been wearing red boots, not the ones she wanted, but she had called them her adventure boots and worn them without complaint. That photograph had sat on his workstation for 2 years. Ella Barrett was 6 years old, and standing beside him now, arms wrapped around a faded stuffed rabbit named Warren. She did not fully understand what was happening. She understood that 2 men in black uniforms had walked her father out of a building, and that her father was carrying a box, and that the walk to the parking lot was very quiet. She held Warren tighter and said nothing. Logan crouched at the gate threshold and adjusted the zipper on her jacket. It had been sticking for weeks, and he kept meaning to replace it. He pressed it gently until it caught, then looked her in the eye and told her everything was okay. He said it the way fathers say things they are not entirely sure are true but mean with everything they have. Connor Vale appeared behind them. He had not needed to come outside. He chose to. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his company jacket, and when he spoke, his voice carried the particular calm of a man who had already won and wanted the other person to feel every inch of that fact. He told Logan that low-level technicians who ran sensor checks and filed overnight reports did not get to question the people who actually ran the facility. Charlotte Ellison stood a few steps back, still in the sharp blazer she had worn to the boardroom. She had not orchestrated this moment, but her silence was its own kind of orchestration. She watched. She did not intervene. Logan looked past Connor and spoke clearly. To no one in particular, and to everyone present. He said that if the human life protocol was disabled on the underground access grid, the entire sub-level system could misread a pressure fault as a containment threat and lock every door in the building. He said it the way a man says something he has already said too many times in the wrong rooms. Connor cut him off. He held up Logan's access card clipped corner, marking its deactivation, then dropped it into the trash receptacle by the gate. Ella watched the card fall. Her eyes went red at the corners. Logan did not move toward Connor. He did not raise his voice. He said, "A door locked at the wrong moment can kill someone." Charlotte heard the words. She processed them as the last emotional flare of a man with nothing left to lose. She turned back toward the building. Connor told Logan to focus on being a decent father instead of pretending to save the world, and followed her in. Logan took Ella's hand and walked toward the parking lot. His car was the oldest one in the row, a faded blue sedan with a cracked mirror fixed with electrical tape. When the steel gate swung shut behind them, the locking mechanism produced a sound deep enough to feel through the soles of their shoes resonant, coming from somewhere far below the surface. Logan stopped walking for exactly 1 second. He looked back at the building, not with anger, with the expression of a man who knows a clock has started. Raven Ridge Applied Systems had operated in the Nevada high desert for 11 years without drawing much public attention. That was the point. It was a private defense research facility specializing in access control systems for environments where failure was not recoverable: clean rooms, energy test chambers, classified data vaults, emergency evacuation tunnels. It built the architecture of doors who could go where, when, and under what conditions. In a world where information and physical safety overlapped constantly, that was not a small thing. From the outside, Logan looked like the least consequential person in the building. He wore the same rotation of collared shirts, none pressed. His boots were scuffed. He left at 4:55 every weekday, without exception because Ella's school released at 5:15, and the drive took exactly 18 minutes. This pattern had become the data point people used to measure him. They concluded he lacked ambition. They were not entirely wrong about the ambition. Logan had simply aimed it somewhere they could not see. Several years earlier, when the Aegis door grid was still a prototype in its second major revision, 3 engineers had been trapped in a sub-level corridor during a test sequence that triggered an unscheduled lockdown. The emergency protocol that should have opened their exit path had a logic flaw. It prioritized asset containment over human egress. They were trapped for 40 minutes before a manual override was located. The incident report was classified. Everyone was told to consider themselves lucky. Logan had been the technician on call that night. He found the override. Afterward, because no one else was going to and the incident had already been sealed away, he spent 3 weeks in the maintenance bay rewriting the core safety logic for the egress system. He built in a priority inversion that triggered whenever occupied space, locked egress, and environmental hazard exceeded a defined threshold. At that point, the system would treat human exit as its highest value objective, overriding all containment commands. He called it Mercy Line. He logged it in the design files and did not make an announcement. He built it in because it needed to be there. Connor Vale arrived 2 years later with a senior security title and the confidence of someone who did not require a track record to announce itself. He looked at the Aegis system and saw a product clean, demonstrable, contract-ready. He also saw, in Logan's layered safety architecture, something inconvenient. A system capable of overriding administrative lockdown commands would not perform flawlessly under a scripted demonstration. He began quietly restructuring it. He did not remove Mercy Line. He buried it. He pushed system updates that nested the protocol beneath conditional layers deep enough that it could not trigger under any scenario his demonstration team had prepared. He also removed Logan's name from the design documentation, routing authorship to a departmental credit that pointed back to his own division. Jason Cole, operations lead, 11 years at the facility, noticed the changes and told Logan about it once, quietly, in the stairwell. He said Connor was making the system look good on paper by making it more dangerous in practice. Then he went back to his station and did not say it to anyone else. Logan ran his own diagnostic on the sub-level logs and found what he had feared. The pressure monitoring subroutine on B7 had been reconfigured so that an anomalous reading, the kind caused by an improperly sealed secondary valve, would trigger a containment event and lock every adjacent door. To protect equipment, it would leave anyone inside to figure out the rest on their own. He filed a formal safety report addressed to Charlotte with supporting data and a projected failure scenario attached. Before Charlotte finished reading the executive summary, Connor had intercepted the submission and reclassified it as a disruptive personnel complaint. Logan's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that sat between a laundromat and a small grocery store. The hallway smelled like other people's cooking, and the radiator knocked twice every morning at 6. There were drawings on the refrigerator Ella's work, mostly houses with open doors, sometimes animals with implausible expressions. The shelves held books on one side and art supplies on the other, crayons sorted by color, construction paper in a bin, small clay animals she named and kept. One evening, before any of the events at Raven Ridge came to a head, Ella had caught Logan checking the door locks before bed and asked him why. He thought about it and told her that a good door was not one that no one could open. A good door was one that knew when to let people out. Ella considered this with the seriousness 6-year-olds bring to things they sense are important, even when they cannot fully decode them. She said okay and went to bed. Logan's wife, Rachel, had died 3 years earlier, a car accident on a wet highway during a business trip, the kind of event that arrives as a phone call you answer in a normal moment, and that divides your life permanently into before and after. She had been an architect. She used to say the two of them had covered every surface that separated inside from outside. She built the walls. He built the logic that governed the openings. After she died, he kept building the logic, more carefully than before. She had been inside something supposed to be safe, and it had failed her, and he could not fix that. He could only make sure every system he touched had a way out built into it. Ella had started drawing houses with doors on every wall, all of them open. She said she liked the idea that if you were inside and something scared you, there would always be a way through. One afternoon she brought Logan a drawing of a tall building with sunlight streaming through every open door and said, "If someone's stuck, they have to have a way out." Logan went very still. Then he folded the drawing carefully, put it in his breast pocket, and named his deep protocol after the principle his daughter had just stated, without knowing she was describing an engineering specification. When he was escorted out of Raven Ridge that night, a newer version of that drawing was folded in the inside pocket of his jacket. A man standing before a row of open doors, Dad helping written at the bottom in her best printing. He had meant to frame it. He had not gotten around to it. It would turn out to matter more unframed. The meeting had been scheduled as a performance review. Logan arrived in his work clothes with a cup of coffee from the break room, which he set on the conference table and did not touch again. The conference room was glass-walled, visible from the corridor. Connor stood at the front with a presentation already loaded. Dominic Stone, the board liaison overseeing the upcoming demonstration, sat at the head of the table in a suit that probably cost more than Logan's monthly take-home. Abigail Crane from Personnel sat at the far end with a folder in front of her. Jason Cole had been called in and sat along the side wall, hands flat on his thighs. Connor's presentation was thorough. He had compiled a log of every instance Logan had accessed technical areas outside his designated scope, framing each as an unauthorized intrusion. The diagnostic Logan ran on the B7 pressure system was listed as a modification attempt. The safety report he had filed was described as a disruptive escalation intended to delay the demonstration timeline. The overall picture was of a low-level technician with a grudge and an inflated sense of his own importance. Logan looked at the slides and recognized every access log. He had been in those areas because the systems there were showing instability that no one else was choosing to document. He said this plainly. Connor asked whether a man who had to leave work at 5 every day to pick up his kid really had the standing to lecture the facility's security director about national-level infrastructure. The question landed precisely where it was aimed. Charlotte asked Logan to answer the core question, had he accessed systems outside his authorized scope? He said yes. He said he had done so because the authorized reports were being filtered before they reached anyone with authority to act. Connor leaned back slightly and spread his hands, as if to say you heard him. He said it himself. Abigail opened the folder. Ella was in the employee waiting lounge 3 hallways away. The school had closed early for a staff development day. She was sitting with Warren and a picture book, and she had no way of knowing she was about to watch something a child should not have to watch. Connor knew she was there. He had checked the visitor log that morning. When security escorted Logan through the main corridor, they passed the lounge. Ella looked up from her book. Logan caught her eyes and arranged his face into something that would not frighten her. He was not entirely successful. Ella stood up slowly, clutching Warren, and watched her father walk past. He was allowed to stop briefly. He crouched and told her they were going home a little early today. He said it as a fact, not an explanation. Ella nodded and took his hand. Before they reached the outer corridor, Logan turned back one final time. He looked at Charlotte. He said, "You can terminate me, but please don't lock living people inside a system designed to protect dead assets." Charlotte held his gaze for a moment. Dominic Stone quietly suggested they wrap up. She signed the document. In the corridor afterward, Jason caught up to Logan near the elevator. He started to say something shaped like an apology. Logan stopped him. He asked only one thing: if the system flagged a pressure anomaly on B7 that night, Jason should not stand in front of any steel door for longer than 30 seconds. Jason looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded. By 9 in the evening, Raven Ridge was lit from every window. The demonstration had been moved to that night. At Dominic Stone's insistence, federal contacts arriving the following morning meant a successful nighttime run would give them something to discuss over breakfast briefings. The control center had been set up as a presentation space, additional monitors, folding chairs for observers, a refreshment table along the back wall. Connor ran the briefing with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it many times. The Aegis door grid, he explained to the assembled board members and agency observers, represented the most sophisticated access control architecture operating in a private facility on American soil. It could lock an entire sublevel in under 3 seconds. It could be administered from a single console by a single authorized operator. He did not mention that several of its original safety parameters had been restructured to achieve those numbers. Charlotte stood near the perimeter of the room, watching the audience as much as the presentation. Dominic Stone was nodding. The observers were taking notes. Everything appeared to be going as planned. Jason was at his operations console, running the systems that kept the presentation functioning. At 9:43, a small indicator on his secondary monitor pulsed yellow a pressure sensor alert from level B7. The current configuration auto-classified it as a minor anomaly and filed it for routine review. The system Logan had originally built would have escalated it immediately. Jason stared at the indicator for several seconds. He looked across the room at Connor, who was still talking. He said nothing yet. The demonstration began at 10 past 10. The simulated intrusion alert fired, the grid responded, and the underground corridors did what they had been built to do. Doors came down. Red lighting replaced standard white. The audio alerts cycled through their sequence with a sound that was deeply convincing. The observers leaned forward. Dominic smiled. In the B7 sublevel, 3 maintenance workers were completing a scheduled check on a secondary drainage conduit. They were not in any demonstration-related log. Connor had reduced the personnel numbers in the facility, manifest to produce cleaner documentation for the board presentation. Fewer entries made a cleaner story. He had assumed the sublevel would be clear. He had assumed incorrectly. When the demonstration lockdown triggered, the B7 crew found themselves between 2 sealed steel doors with no override console within reach. Simultaneously, a secondary utility valve that had been on a deferred maintenance list for 6 weeks registered an abnormal pressure state. The fault was real. The demonstration was not designed to distinguish between real faults and scripted ones during an active lockdown sequence. Jason's secondary monitor lit up full red. He stood from his console without waiting for anyone's permission and said, loudly and clearly, that he had a non-simulated alarm on B7. Connor said the system occasionally generated noise during live demonstrations and that flagging it publicly was premature. He said it quietly, so the observers might not fully catch the exchange. Charlotte heard it. She stepped toward Jason's station and asked whether any personnel were currently in the sublevel. Connor said the manifest showed it was clear. Charlotte looked at Jason. Jason pulled up the badge log and found 2 active sign-ins at B7 that had not been reconciled. He said so out loud. At 11:47, every monitor in the control room went dark for 3 seconds. When they came back, the facility map covered all of them. One by one, the red door indicators on B7 shifted not to the yellow of a controlled override, but to white. A text notification populated across the primary display. Mercy line engaged. Human exit priority restored. Below that, in a smaller field that appeared to have been sitting in the system's memory for years, Logan still holds the key. Connor Vale went very still. The sound that moved through Raven Ridge in the following 90 seconds was not an alarm. It was something older and more mechanical, the sequential release of steel doors, moving upward from the sublevels like something waking up. Each opening was part of a directed egress sequence. Emergency corridors first, then interconnecting passages, then stairwell access points. The system was doing exactly what it had been designed to do, in precisely the circumstances it had been designed to handle, years after the person who designed it had been told his work no longer mattered. The maintenance team on B7 heard the doors before they saw them move. One crew member later said it sounded like someone had told the building to breathe. The first door opened less than 4 minutes before the secondary utility valve failed completely, venting into the corridor. They cleared the zone with minutes to spare. They were shaken, confused, and completely uninjured. In the control room, Charlotte stood in front of the central display and felt a cold that had nothing to do with the facility's environmental systems. She had heard Logan Barrett say the words. She had decided they were the wounded pride of a terminated employee. She was reconsidering that decision in real time, with approximately 20 observers watching her face. Mercy Line's activation did something else Connor had not anticipated. When the protocol reinstated full humanitarian egress priority, It also restored the audit architecture that Logan had built into the first version of Aegis, a transparency layer that logged every administrative change made to the access control parameters. This log had been inaccessible under Connor's configuration revisions. It was now visible on a secondary monitor, scrolling through 3 years of entries. Jason found it first. He read for about 15 seconds, then said Charlotte's name. When she looked at him, he pointed at the screen without elaboration. The log was clear. Connor Vale had deactivated 3 separate human safety warnings over 14 months. He had reclassified a documented near miss as a sensor malfunction. He had removed Logan Barrett's name from the original Aegis design credit. He had received Logan's safety report and marked it for suppression without escalation. Dominic Stone began making arguments quickly and quietly. The log might be corrupted. The timing was suspicious. Perhaps Logan had planted something before leaving. His reasoning had the shape of skepticism and the structure of hope dressed as logic. Connor made commands, not arguments. He moved to the primary console and attempted to re-engage the full lockdown sequence using his administrative credentials. The system processed his input, paused, and returned. In Mercy Line active state, administrative lockdown commands are subordinate to human egress protocol. Override denied. The facility had refused him. Charlotte asked Jason whether there was any evidence of unauthorized external access or planted code. Jason ran the verification and came back with the same answer Logan would have given. Mercy Line was original architecture. It was not sabotage. It was a deeply buried protocol waiting for the exact conditions Connor had created so it could wake up and do its job. In the Records Archive section, its door also opened as part of the egress sequence. A physical folder contained a printed safety report signed by Logan Barrett, dated 3.5 years ago. It described, in precise technical language, the exact failure scenario that had just nearly killed 3 people. The document predated Connor's appointment to his current role. Logan's name had been removed from the digital version that circulated afterward. The physical copy had simply waited. Charlotte picked it up. She read the first page, standing in the fluorescent light of the archive room, and she did not put it down. Logan was at the kitchen table when his phone rang. He had spent the 2 hours since arriving home the way fathers spend quiet hours, dinner made, dishes washed, a drawing finished with Ella, and then, after she fell asleep, the small lamp on her nightstand taken apart because it had been flickering for 3 days. The loose connection was at the base. He fixed it with the tools he kept in the kitchen drawer and reassembled it carefully. He did not think about Raven Ridge. He thought about the lamp. Ella had woken around 11 and found him at the table. She asked if he was sad. He said that sometimes things happened that were confusing, and you had to sit with them before they made sense. She said that sounded like a puzzle. He said it was exactly like a puzzle. She got a glass of water and went back to bed. The number on the screen was Jason's. Logan looked at it for the length of several breaths. He picked up. Jason talked fast. The maintenance team, Mercy Line, the log revelations, Connor's failed override. Logan listened without interrupting. By the time Jason described the crew trapped on B7, Logan had already stood up from the table. He asked one question before anything else. Was anyone hurt? Not whether Connor had been exposed. Not what this meant for his termination. He asked about the people. Jason said no one was injured. Then Charlotte's voice came through without the institutional scaffolding. Her work voice usually carried. She said she needed him to come back. Logan said nothing for several seconds. She said I was wrong. 2 words. No cushioning. No caveat. Logan walked to Ella's doorway and looked in. She was asleep with one hand tucked under her cheek, Warren wedged against the wall. The lamp he had fixed cast a small circle of warm light. In the half-awake version of herself, Ella murmured into her pillow, "Is someone stuck behind the door?" Logan put on his jacket. He knocked on Mrs. Hadley's door across the hall. She opened it in a bathrobe without apparent surprise and took the spare key and a short explanation. Before leaving, he went back to the kitchen table, where Ella had left the drawing she'd been finishing, a man standing outside a row of open doors, Dad helping written at the bottom. He put the drawing in his pocket. He was not going back to prove anything. He was going back because 3 people had nearly died, because a system he had built with care was being used against the principle it was meant to serve, and because the kind of man he wanted his daughter to know could not drive away from that. The Raven Ridge parking lot was full at midnight. The guard at the back gate, the same one on duty during the earlier escort, looked at Logan for a moment when he pulled up. Then he checked his radio, stepped aside, and lifted the barrier. Connor Vale was in the main corridor. He moved to intercept, citing the formal access revocation with the compressed precision of someone managing panic through authority. Charlotte came around the corner behind him, looked at him, and said she had requested Logan's presence and that Connor's instructions were not operative at this moment. Connor started to object. Charlotte said, "That's enough, Connor." She said it the way people say things when they are not asking. In the control center, the atmosphere had the particular charge of a room where something has gone badly wrong and everyone present is waiting for someone else to name it first. The board observers had moved to a side wall. Dominic Stone was on his phone. The technical staff had clustered around the monitoring stations, watching the Aegis display still glowing white with active Mercy Line indicators. Logan did not make a speech. He asked Jason for the current facility map, the sub-level personnel headcount, the list of doors that had not opened mechanically during the Mercy Line sequence, and the maintenance deference log for the past 2 months. Jason pulled all of it up. Logan looked at the data for about 45 seconds. Then he told the team what needed to happen. 3 doors had mechanical faults, not electrical, not software that had prevented them from opening during the egress sequence. Their physical actuators had been on Connor's deferred maintenance list longer than the safety window allowed. There was a second group of personnel in a transitional zone near B5, whose egress path was blocked by one of these stuck doors. They were not yet in danger, but the same cascade conditions that had hit B7 could reach them if the environmental sensors registered another fault. Connor insisted Logan was manufacturing a crisis to justify being in the room. Logan did not argue. He asked Jason to pull the camera on B5 corridor, Section 3. On the monitor, through reinforced glass, 2 facility crew members were pressed against the wall with a hand radio, their body language telling the whole story. The audio picked up one of them saying, in a voice working hard to stay calm, that they were running low on air quality tolerance in the zone. The room went quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when everyone realizes the argument they were having was not the real issue. Logan directed the technical team through the auxiliary mechanical bypass, a pathway that existed in the original design precisely for this scenario, speaking clearly and without hesitation, because he had designed this system and knew its architecture the way a builder knows the bones of a house built by hand. He went down into the sublevels with Jason. The emergency lighting made the corridors look like the bottom of something deep. Logan moved through them with the ease of someone who had walked them alone on hundreds of overnight shifts, while everyone else was upstairs at their desks with their better titles and cleaner shoes. At the stuck door, he could see one of the workers through the reinforced glass panel. A young woman in facility coveralls, forehead pressed against the glass, eyes wide. Logan placed his hand flat on his side of the glass and told her they were about to release the manual lever. He said it slowly and looked directly at her. She nodded. He watched her slow her breathing. He and Jason worked the auxiliary release. The mechanism had corroded from deferred maintenance, but it gave after the 3rd attempt. The door moved. The 2 workers came through. Charlotte had been watching through the corridor camera feed. When the door opened and the workers stepped out, she put one hand on the edge of her console and held it there. She had decided that a man who asked inconvenient questions was a problem to be managed. She was now watching that man release people from a room that her own decisions had contributed to creating. When the last personnel had been confirmed safe and the facility manifest showed all staff accounted for, Charlotte locked the control room. She told the board observers the post-incident review would be internal and that they would receive a full briefing through official channels the following morning. Dominic Stone started to object. Charlotte said the decision was final. Connor moved toward the exit. A facility security officer who had worked the gate for 8 years stepped into the doorway and said Connor was requested to remain. Connor asked who had requested it. The officer said Charlotte Ellison, as executive director of record. The full administrative log of the Aegis system covered 3 years in detail that had the precision of something designed to be irrefutable. Jason walked Charlotte through it, section by section, with printed copies time-stamped uneditable, because Logan had mentioned once that important things should exist somewhere. Software alone could not touch. The entries told a single, coherent story. Connor had received the original Mercy Line design documentation and marked it as a low-priority legacy component. He had modified activation threshold parameters without going through the standard safety review process. He had reviewed Logan's formal safety report in full, confirmed by the access timestamp, and entered a suppression tag routing it out of the executive review queue. He had signed off on the personnel manifest that excluded the maintenance workers from the demonstration notification hours before the event. Abigail Crane had not been part of any of that, but she had been part of what came after. She stood beside the conference table and said plainly, without being prompted, that Connor had given her a termination package built from selectively excerpted log entries, and that she had been afraid to ask questions. She said fear was not a sufficient explanation. It was the true one. Dominic Stone made one final repositioning attempt. He suggested, an internal resolution would better serve the facility's commercial interests. Charlotte listened to him finish. Then she said that a facility could keep technological secrets. It could not keep secrets about human endangerment while she was in charge of it. Connor made his final argument. He said the Mercy Line activation proved only that rogue code existed in a system he had been trying to secure, and that Logan had built himself a ghost key and used it to disrupt a federal demonstration from the outside. He had been rehearsing some version of this since 1147, and it had nearly convinced him. Logan looked at him and said, "Security that doesn't protect people is just an expensive cage." Connor had no answer for that. Not a real one. Charlotte issued a formal administrative suspension, signed in writing, effective immediately. Connor's credentials were revoked at the console, in front of the technical staff, the board observers, and the security officer at the door. He was escorted out through the back gate, the same pavement, the same floodlights, the same gate through which Logan had walked out hours earlier, carrying a small cardboard box. The facility quieted around 2 in the morning. The board observers had gone. Jason was running final system checks. The staff that remained worked in the low, careful voices of people who had been genuinely frightened and were not yet ready to call it anything else. Charlotte found Logan in the main corridor near the operations wing. The emergency red lighting had been deactivated. The standard white overhead illumination was back, and in that ordinary light the facility looked like a workplace again, smaller than it had seemed at the height of the crisis. She did not begin with a qualification. She said she had misjudged the situation the way leaders sometimes do by evaluating a message based on the position of its messenger rather than the content of what was being said. She had trusted the architecture of authority over the architecture of evidence. 3 people had nearly died as a consequence. That was not abstract regret. It was a specific accounting of specific choices. She also said that Ella should not have seen what she saw. A child should not watch her father be walked out of a building as though he had done something shameful. Charlotte had been standing there when it happened and had not intervened. That had been a failure of a different kind, not of procedure, but of basic human decency. Logan said he did not need to be recognized. He was not interested in a ceremony. He just needed to know that the next person who filed a safety report with accurate data would be heard, not managed. Charlotte asked about the message that had appeared on the central display. Logan still holds the key. She needed to understand it. Logan said it was not his. He had not written it. Jason, who had quietly entered the corridor at some point during the conversation, looked at the floor for a moment. Then he said he had added that notation into a legacy test build years ago, after the night Logan had worked until morning to fix the flaw that had trapped the 3 engineers. It was a note in the code, the way people leave markers in work they consider important. He had not thought about it in years. He said he was sorry it had caused confusion, and also that he was not entirely sorry it had appeared. Charlotte looked at Jason for a long moment. Then she turned back to Logan and told him the facility wanted him back. She said it as a formal statement, not a gesture. Logan said there was something she needed to do first. Charlotte came to the apartment the next morning. No facility vehicle, no assistant, no prepared remarks on company letterhead. She parked on the street, walked up 3 flights, and knocked on the door at 8:45, carrying a letter she had written by hand and a new access card in a plain envelope. Ella answered the door. She was in her pajamas, Warren under one arm, her hair in the sideways ponytail Logan had clearly done his best with. She looked at Charlotte with the direct, uncomplicated assessment that children apply to adults they have decided to evaluate seriously. Charlotte recognized Ella. Ella recognized Charlotte. This was the woman who had been standing in the hallway when her father walked out with the box. The recognition was visible in Ella's face, not anger, but the exact expression a child makes when an adult who should have acted did not. Charlotte crouched to Ella's level. She said she owed Ella an apology. She said that Ella's father had tried very hard to do the right thing, and Charlotte had not listened when she should have. She said she was sorry Ella had seen what happened at the building, and that it had not been fair, and that none of it had been Ella's father's fault. Ella considered this carefully, holding Warren to her chest. Then she said, "Did my dad do anything wrong?" Charlotte said no. "Your dad was trying to save people." Ella accepted this as the complete answer it was. She stepped back from the doorway and called for her father. Logan came from the kitchen drying his hands on a dish towel. He saw Charlotte in the doorway, then looked at his daughter first. Ella gave a small, serious nod. She had conducted the preliminary portion of the meeting, and it had gone adequately. Logan's expression changed in the way that happens when something you have been holding yourself tightly around finally releases. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them. Charlotte laid out what she was offering. The position was new, Director of Human Systems Safety for Raven Ridge Applied Systems. The mandate was to review and rebuild the safety architecture of every access system in the facility from first principles human life, as the primary protected asset, not the secondary one. Full authority to document, escalate, and halt any process that could not satisfy that standard. Logan named 3 conditions. First, a protected channel for any employee at any level to report safety concerns without fear of retaliation, administered outside the security division. Second, Mercy Line restored to its original activation parameters and embedded as a mandatory, unremovable layer in all future Aegis versions. Third, the design history of every system at the facility correctly attributed to its actual authors, formalized before any future contract presentations. Charlotte agreed to all 3. In the weeks that followed, Raven Ridge held a different kind of meeting than the one that had been planned. No agency observers, no demonstration lighting. A working session for the full technical staff, led by Logan in a clean shirt, standing at the front of the same room where he had once been told he was not important enough to ask questions. He talked about systems that remember what they are for. He talked about the difference between security that protects people and security that protects the appearance of control. He did not need many slides. Ella was in the front row. She did not understand all of it. She understood the part that mattered. Jason Cole was promoted to lead systems operations, a role that gave him the authority to pause any demonstration if his monitors showed something real. Abigail Crane moved to a newly formed internal ethics office with a direct reporting line to the board. Connor Vale's administrative conduct was referred to the facility's oversight council and the relevant federal contracting authority. Dominic Stone resigned his board seat before the review was complete. On the last evening of that first week, Logan and Ella walked out of Raven Ridge together. The main gate opened ahead of them, the front gate, the one facing the road, the one whose sign declared it the entrance to something that took its work seriously. The desert was warm. The light was going gold across the hills to the west. Ella asked if her dad was ever going to be scared of a locked door again. Logan looked at her and said, "Not if the person who built it still remembers who it's supposed to protect." She took his hand. The gate closed behind them, not like a lock, like a period at the end of a sentence that had finally said everything it needed to say. That night, somewhere in the facility's deep operational memory, Mercy Line rested in its ready state, not dormant, not buried, simply waiting, the way good things wait, for the moment it would be needed again. And whoever came next to maintain the system would find Logan Barrett's name in the original design file, exactly where Charlotte Ellison had made certain it would stay.